How common is this experience? You want to find an old copy of something. Maybe you're a Doctor Who fan wanting to watch the Doctor visit the Siege of Troy. Maybe you found out about an old silent film that sounds interesting. Or maybe you've just heard of a film so bizarre you just have to see it to confirm that it's real. But then you run into a wall. No known copies exist, or perhaps they do exist but are locked up in a vault. This is an example of lost media, or a missing episode. Now, not all lost media is equally lost. There is media that is truly lost, i.e. have no known copies currently existing. These are what TV tropes calls missing episodes. Some are partially missing, but are partially intact. Some have a confirmed copy, but for whatever reason are not released to the public. These are unavailable or banned episodes. And finally, there are episodes that are technically in the public sphere, but are really hard to find. For example, maybe they only exist on a rare VHS tape that gets passed around, or maybe the hardware required to play them is expensive. Now, as there is a lot to cover under this topic, I will be reserving this video for media with known copy, rather than covering merely rare or unavailable media. So, while, for example, the unreleased Dave the Clown Cried is a fascinating story in its own right, we know where it is and when it will be released, so I won't be covering it. I will also not be covering lost death footage or similar things, because that might put off the more sensitive people in my audience. I may cover either topic in a separate video, however. Now, onto the juicy stuff. Media has been lost since media has been invented. Many of the epic poems of the Trojan cycle are lost, as are many of the plays of Greek theatre. Many Arabic alchemical texts burned up with the Library of Alexandria. Historical records are burned up regularly during invasions. And, of course, the Institute of Sexology was set on fire by the Nazis, destroying priceless information about LGBT plus people in the process. But when people talk about lost media, they're usually talking about more modern things. So, shall we sail the seas of the lost together? Our story begins with the silent films and early talkies. These films were recorded on silver nitrate film stock. Silver nitrate is prone to decomposition and also bursting into flames. So many early films were destroyed in vault fires, most notably Cleopatra, which has a mere 20 seconds remaining despite being a massive hit at the time. In addition, silver nitrate contained silver, giving a financial incentive for studios to sell useless tapes. Some less well-known victims of the time are Children of Loneliness, directed by Richard C. Kahn, and 1937 exploitation film about gay people, though it wouldn't be considered sympathetic. The Dream Woman, 1914 adaptation of a novel by the same name, and an early example of a film directed and written by a woman, Alice Guy. The Werewolf from 1930 was the first werewolf movie, starring Marie Wellcamp as the titular werewolf, and it was based on a Navajo legend. Convention Sitting, a 1938 sex comedy, was a victim of this, junkings, and tape burnings in response to moral panic. A film named Brother Martin, The Servant of Jesus, is a lost race film, a genre with all-black casts made by and for Black Americans. This film tells the story of Saint Martin de Perez, a Peruvian man who ascended into sainthood for his medical work, including several miraculous healings. In addition, there are films which are only partially complete thanks to nitrate decomposition. A 1915 German film called The Golem by Paul Wegener and Henrik Green, the latter of whom wrote Nosferatu, about a clay monster who used to protect Jewish people from their persecutors, who comes back to life and goes on a rampage, only has the first act and a couple of minutes from the second act surviving. Also, there is a parody of this film, The Golem and the Dancing Girl, by one of the same writers, Paul Wegener, not to be confused with the Nazi official of the same name, which is one heck of a disclaimer to have to write. 2 years after the first, which is completely lost. There is also Creation, a film about dinosaurs, and while that was never finished, had 20 minutes of it completed, of which only 4 minutes survives. And different from the others, a 1919 film, and one of the earliest sympathetic portrayals of homosexuality, of which 50 minutes survives. It is unclear how long the original time was. This last one was created as a protest against the criminalisation of homosexuality and was praised by the gay community in Germany at the time. Onto the small screen, while tapes were better quality by the time television became widely available and less prone to bursting into flames, there were still issues. Firstly, the technology to record shows was still in its infancy. At first, if you wanted to do a repeat, you'd have to literally repeat the performance, like in the theatre. The first method developed to record shows was telerecording, i.e. pointing a camera at the television, which, while an obvious solution, often resulted in poor quality. For example, the first 2 episodes of the Quatermass Experiments, a show with massive influence on British science fiction, including Doctor Who, were telerecorded, but the results were so poor quality, with a fly being on screen in episode 2, that they didn't bother with episodes 3 to 6, meaning that those are lost. Worse still, the cost of tape was expensive, as was the storage, which meant that there was financial incentive for stations to junk, wipe tapes, and then record episodes over them. And when television started moving to colour, that meant old black and white episodes were considered less valuable. And with reruns and relatively new concept, and with VHS still in the future, many tapes were not considered valuable. The BBC was particularly notorious for this, thanks to its wiping of Doctor Who, of which 97 episodes remain a casualty as of this writing, though fortunately audio for all the missing episodes as well as many telesnaps survive. Other victims of the BBC purge include many episodes of Adam Adamant's Lives, a show about a swashbuckling vigilante who was cryogenically frozen for 50 years and was woken up in 1960s England. 17 out of 30 episodes survive. Out of the Unknown, a sci-fi anthology series, 20 out of 49 episodes survive. The Wednesday Play, an anthology series of TV plays, a very successful and acclaimed series in its day thanks to its presentation of contemporary issues, has 76 out of 170 episodes remaining. The First Lady, a show about a crusading local councillor named Sarah Danby, has only 1 episode out of 39 remaining. Do Watch, a sci-fi show about scientific ethics, has 24 out of 38 episodes remaining. And finally, United, a football show with 147 episodes released, but none surviving. The BBC was not the only station guilty of this. Its rival, ITV, was also known for wiping tapes, though tapes were often saved by having multiple copies at multiple local stations. This system also had its flaws for archival, as tapes were at risk when rights were moved from one station to the next. The majority of Series 1 of The Avengers, for example, is missing, with only 3 episodes plus 20 minutes from episode 1 surviving, though the other series are intact. Do Not Adjust Your Set, a precursor to Monty Python, only has 11 out of 29 episodes surviving. So, why does this matter? This is a question I ask myself often. Now, I believe in knowledge and the preservation of knowledge as an end in and of itself. However, this argument only really works with the kind of person who already thinks archival is important. So let me try a leftist argument, because I know my audience. If you are a marginalised person, your media is more likely to be considered unimportant, and thus less likely to have the effort taken to preserve. Worse still, you are more likely to be the victim of moral panic-induced burnings. Large amounts of imperialism involved destroying precious cultural artifacts, including libraries. There is a reason every nerd has cried extensively about the burning of Library of Alexandria, but the Maya codices of the Yucatan that were mostly destroyed by the Spanish remain relatively unmourned, while a lot of these might not be media, depending on what definition you use, they are certainly valuable pieces of art and knowledge that losing is a tragedy. Now, there are so many ways for media to get lost, but many of them share this common theme of apathy, often corporate apathy, leading to a failure to back up. Often, the surviving copies are actually pirated. So let's see how you can help prevent history repeating itself. Right now, the two biggest mediums at risk of being lost are web media and video games. Let's start with video games. When looking at the list of lost video games on TV Tropes and the Lost Media Wiki, most of it are unreleased games, prototype versions, and deleted scenes. Or, in other words, content that was never available to the public, though I did heavily consider talking about Ruby Dung and Dinosaur Planet in this video before deciding that it wasn't quite under the definition of missing used here. However, there are a lot of games that are at risk. On the NES, 716 games were released. Of those, only 94 are available on the Nintendo Virtual Console. This issue is similarly repeated on many other consoles. Currently, you can find any game you wish on eBay or Amazon along with the consoles. However, at some point, these consoles will become unusable, and all that will remain are recreations of these games. Currently, the only copies of many games are on emulators, which, while illegal, I'm not telling you to get copies of games on an emulator to preserve said games for prosperity, but if I were, I'd tell you that pirating media has saved it in the past. On the subject of web media, this is a lot easier to solve, so repeat after me. Back up your shit. I would create 3 backups, one on your computer, one on a USB pen, and one on archive.org. That way, if the website goes down or deletes your content, which as we know happens all the time, it is still safe. In addition, I have copies of the voice and video tapes I edit together to create my videos, and while this step isn't necessary, it is a nice bonus. However, not all of your problems can be fixed like this. Often, software slowly becomes unsupported, meaning more complicated solutions are necessary. For this problem, I'm going to use Flash as an example. Flash, if you haven't heard, is becoming unsupported as of 2020. This, on the surface, is a good idea, as Flash Player is actually terrible. However, many games and animations are now at risk because browsers won't play them. To solve this issue, a group called Flashpoint is hacking into Flash creations in order to have them archived in time for oblivion. If there are any games or animations you want preserved, check their list to see if they have them, and if they don't, fill in the form. I have barely scratched the surface on the topic of lost media, and while I may do more videos, in the meantime, I've linked some organisations that work to preserve at-risk art or rescue lost media, because they could really use your help.